Governor Yari there, the chairman of the Governors Forum. We have joining us now political analyst Abiodun Shomi in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
I'm pleased to be here.
Right. At the meeting with between the president and the governors, there was a report that the president was wondering how workers were coping with their everyday lives and their family needs and school fees of children and all of that. I want to ask, is the president, should he be wondering, or is there a way that he can decisively ensure that there's the welfare of people at that level, workers at the state level?
Yeah, well, the president realized the limitations of his authority when it comes to issues involving constituent parts of the federation. In this case, the states. The states have their own rights to run their affairs the way they deem it fit. So also the federal government has its own constitutional responsibility under the exclusive list. So for Mr. President, yes, that might not be acceptable. The major issue is that whatever happens to the states will affect the performance of the economy. Consequently, affects the federal government's efforts in reviving the economy. Unfortunately, when salaries are not paid, the economy is likely going to go into recession because people won't have money to buy goods. Companies will begin to downsize workers, and then we have excess goods in the market. There's no money, to chase it. In many cases, you end up having stagflation, which we ended up with in Nigeria. So it is in Mr. President's interest to ensure that the states are performing reasonably well enough to the extent that they're able to meet their obligations to the workers. Rather than calling it governors demanding bailout, I would say workers are demanding bailout.
Okay, we'll come to that. He also wondered how anybody could go to sleep, have a good night's sleep, knowing that workers have not been paid their salaries. At least that's what the president expressed only recently. Now, this demand for 50% of the remaining bailout has thrown up another debate, while some are saying, what are you asking for more bailout for? What have you done with the 1-point-something trillion that you already have been given? You've not given a good account of it. While some are saying, look, don't get it twisted. This was money from the states anyhow in the first place, talking about the Paris
Fund.
Fund. Yes.
Yeah.
Where do you stand really in terms of whether it's Paris Fund or any other fund for that matter? Should the governors be asking for this bailout?
Well, the case of Paris Fund, the governors may be right to say, look, it's money in the first instance. We're only asking for it back, and we have a right to use it the way we deem it fit. But in the case of financial support relief, which is what they are asking for now, that's a totally different thing. And that is why the federal government, is attaching conditions to that. When you look at the arguments of the state, it is not tenable. You cannot say the payment of salaries is priority. It should be the first priority for any government. But we must admit that the economy was mismanaged, and even in some cases it's still being mismanaged. Many of the governors are trying their best to manage the economy given the huge debt profile of their states, and in some cases some are also being reckless with it. The fact of the matter is not paying worker salaries should not be an acceptable way, to meet challenges of the economy. A lot of behavior, reckless borrowing happened in the past, and many of them are tied to being deducted from source. That is, before the state could lay their hands on the money, the banks will have to take whatever they've borrowed.
Yes.
So because of that, that has complicated, the problems for many of the states to the point that the federal government, had to intervene in the case of the issuance of bond. But what they're trying to do now is to resolve the problem. Because if you go back, just some months ago, I think it's in April, April 24, April 25, the ICPC came out with the position that many, about 12 of the state governments did not apply the funds appropriately.
Yes.
And in some cases, they cited the example of a state, which I don't want to mention, that, got 34 billion or 36 billion naira without even paying salaries, and diverted that money, for developmental projects. And that money was not meant for that purpose. In some other cases, there is another case,
But is there anything wrong fundamentally for monies to be used for developmental projects? I mean, we say they are developmental.
No.
And
nothing is wrong.
Sustainable.
The bailout fund was meant to pay workers' salaries.
Specifically.
So, specifically.
So if you don't have a demand on salaries,
you shouldn't. Precisely. Claiming it, reduces, the access of other states to that fund. Some other states need more money than what they got. So they would have gotten more. Then you have a state non-needing, actually taking,
so
the money for other purposes.
Spread very lean.
Precisely. But what the government is trying to do now, which both of them, both the states and federal government are trying to do currently, if you go by the accounts of what happened at the National Economic meeting, the last meeting which they had, the states have subscribed, to the agenda whereby they publish the budget under the FSP, the Financial Sustainability Plan. They have to publish the budget and audited statements, which many states are not doing till now, to make it transparent. They are also required, to introduce, biometric and BVN payroll system. It's not all the states. Many of the states have introduced it, but it's not all of them. They have to restrict borrowing from the banks. They are also required to, set targets for IGR and meet those targets. They are required to set up efficiency units, in order to cut down, on waste. They are also required, to domesticate public sector fiscal responsibility act. And also, on the part of the federal government, the federal government has agreed to support the state with the introduction of international public sector accounting standards compliance software, and also set new guidelines for bonds, so that many of those states, could access, capital finance for capital projects, from the international, from the local market. In the past, what has happened is when they gave out the bailout, the states were not allowed to access the bonds, the market. So because of that, you see some states, manipulating the process. So what they're trying to do now is that, look, in exchange for this 22-point guideline, we are also committed to do this and ease your access to bond, because we can satisfy ourselves that
you have done
precisely. So maybe this time around we'll get it right. But the devil is always in monitoring.
Devil is in the detail.
There will always
As
be
always.
the devil in there.
What do you make of Haman Tukor, the former chairman of Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Response? It's so long. RMAFC. I think we'll help ourselves by just reducing it. Revenue Allocation Commission. Is somebody listening? Ramfac. Yes, that's what it is. He's saying that the president's release of these funds to the governors is actually illegal. He has raised some very salient questions. Who gave him the money? He's asking Buhari who gave him the money. How did he get access to it? And was Buhari, the president, authorized to release the monies? Did he get appropriation for all of these funds? Those are the questions he has raised, and he, of all people, should know better.
Yeah, he's actually making a very valid point if we are to look at it objectively, because you cannot spend money not appropriated for in any budget. It should have been appropriated for. But we all know that when you find yourself in a case of emergency, in quote, doctrine of necessity now comes into it, because you find the lawmakers not actually kicking against it. Many of the lawmakers know the position of their states. They know the workers will be up in arms against them, including the governors. So they are not kicking against it. The fact of the matter is not just about access to those funds, is how that fund, the money being released, is being used that matters more. Yes, it is true, for purpose, whatever they're discussing now, whatever agreement they reach, will necessarily not be released this year. It will be part of next year's budget, so that states can include it in their budget, publish the budget. It's one of the things the federal government is demanding for. I think, and I honestly read, that they intend to go through the National Assembly this time around, include it in the budget, and then get it appropriated for. So we may, at the end of the day, overcome the problem being raised by Tukor. But the 2015 one was a major issue. In the sense that it was an emergency. Many of the states were, workers were on strike, the whole system is breaking down. We need to understand that we are just about coming out of recession. If we are not careful on worker salary, we will easily walk back into recession. So if we want to solve our economic challenges, we have to ensure that people are paid. To ensure they are paid, states must have the funds. For states to have the funds, it needs to be appropriated for. So one hopes the Minister of Finance will ensure that this time around, it's in the budget and it's processed through the National Assembly.
All right, Governor Abdulaziz Yari said that the intervention or the bailout from the federal government was largely responsible for getting Nigeria out of recession. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's contributory.
Okay.
It's not just one thing. We have inflows, increase in inflows in foreign direct investment, the FDI into the country. That is also contributory. It's not just one thing. We also have steps taken by the federal government, to ensure that we can get out of it. Then there's also the climate, the international climate. There's the international oil price, which improved. If it had been on the decline, we wouldn't have been out of it. So that's the truth of the matter. It's multiple, factors that account for being able to bounce back.
But really, can any economy grow or even survive, barely survive, based on these temporary interventions and from federal government?
Yeah, they are not long-term solutions.
Exactly.
Whatever
Shouldn't the focus really now be on how these states can actually provide or make their states more economically viable and all of that?
Absolutely. It's part of what they have agreed in the fiscal sustainability plan, the 22-point agenda. What they are doing currently are short-term measures. It's called financial support facility is what the states are drawing on now. Now, if you look at the terms, the part of the terms, the 22 terms in the fiscal sustainability plan, it requires the states to set IGR, new IGR, and meet the targets. It also includes efficiency units, that they must create efficiency units in order to cut down waste. It includes, privatizing public state enterprises that are drained on public purse. That is, they are not making any profit or any surplus, but just consuming. So when you look at those three steps, on one hand, the states will be able to reduce their recurrent expenditure, reduce, facilities, state enterprises that are major problems, financial problems, while at the same time increase their IGR. With that, they're hoping the states will be able to meet their obligations to the banks on what they have borrowed and also meet their obligations to their people, including the workers.
Well, in this now, there are so many arguments. Governor Abdulaziz Yari has assured the president and said that previous bailouts were judiciously used and deployed as a case. But between 2015 and now, several bailouts have been given and so on. This availability, the availability of bailout in the first place, a lot of people have argued that it makes the states even lazy.
Yes,
because when it gets to that level,
they know they can always
go to the government to talk about bailouts.
Yes, Governor Yari also admitted in June that some states that got paid the bailout, that banks, deducted what they were owing them, from the money. So he couldn't have, I think, I would refrain from saying that he's been economical with the truth, to say that it was totally used judiciously. Don't forget the ICPC also investigated and they came out with their own findings. I think what we can say is that abuse is within tolerable limits, when you are dealing with 36 state governments, then if you have 1, 2 or 3 cases, then maybe that is what he's basing his own position on. But the fact of the matter is, whether it's encouraging state indolence or not, we need to first and foremost be concerned about people's right, which is the right of the workers to have their salary. 2, we need to be concerned that our economy must not collapse. Because if we adopt that attitude that is encouraging state indolence, what would happen is companies will fold up, because if people can't buy their products, what then happen? Because they have not been paid. So companies will fold up, we will create a major crisis for ourselves. So whether we like it or not, federal government has a duty to intervene to support the state
ensure
government.
that the states
it's not all the
collapse.
states government that are in trouble.
That's
that
the point.
Is the truth.
Are we even looking at some of those states like Jigawa, for example, a small state carved out of old Kano state that some would even say is totally economically non-viable, yet it has not you know, defaulted in payment of salaries.
Jigawa is not in trouble.
What is Jigawa doing right that some of these other states can actually take a cue from?
There are different issues. Jigawa is not in trouble. Lagos is not in trouble. Ogun is not in trouble. Zamfara is not in trouble. There are quite a number of states not in trouble. That's the truth of the matter. But you need to look at the level of activity going on in these states. For instance, in Osun, there is huge expenditure on education. Huge expenditure on education. That's the priority for that government. So consequently, you know, education requires a lot of investment. That is what Osun is doing. In Ogun, they are doing road, you know, infrastructural developments and all that, and that is their own priority. So in each state is different. In Lagos, the priority is also different. Same thing in Zamfara. Some of them are not actually embarking on major projects. They are only contented with, you know, paying salaries, you know, and then walk away with it. But you need to look at the future. How do you get your state, you know, in a ready for to compete, you know, for foreign direct investment, even for internal investment? How? They need facility, they need the infrastructures. Yes. If you don't have the right infrastructure, including housing in place, many employers will not invest in your state because they won't have the decent houses where they want their workers to live in. So these are some of the issues, you know, and it depends on how ambitious a state is. A state like Rivers is doing very well. Some of them are involved in power generation, including Akwa Ibom. They've borrowed so much money, you know, to invest in that sector. You cannot compare them to a state that has little or no interest in capital expenditure, just satisfied with paying recurrent expenditure. So it depends. We can't just look at it sweepingly.
All right. So in this case now, should the president, because we're talking about giving them bailouts for them to infuse into the appropriation
2018?
For 2018. Are we looking at the National Assembly? There's a requirement for the National Assembly to give approval to the president to do that?
The National Assembly will have no choice but to give approval because they are already faced with rising demands, you know, from the labor unions asking for increase in salary. So the minimum they would do is to approve the money so that they can offset what is owed currently, rather than allow it to get forged up in new demands for increase in salary. I cannot see how the National Assembly will resist that if the federal government agrees to, which I think they have, provide them the financial support relief to the states. They would only insist on ensuring that the states comply with the 22 points in the fiscal sustainability plan.
And these loans, these are loans, and loans are expected to be paid back.
Yes.
Are we paying enough attention to that aspect of paying back? How do these states pay back when the time comes for them to pay back?
Many of the states will not be able to pay back without restructuring the country, except you devolve, you know, responsibility from the states, from the federal government, you know, to the states. They will not be able to. Let me give you a good example. There are states sitting on gold mines. You know, for instance, the whole of Elisha is full of gold, but they can't tap it because the federal government is in charge of it. Lagos cannot even tap the mineral resources in the waters of Lagos because it's also the responsibility of the federal government.
The exclusive list.
Exclusive list. So when you look at so many issues, agriculture, look, what is federal government doing with Federal Ministry of Agriculture? They don't control the land. You need land for agriculture.
And the land is
and they're still appropriating billions for that. So except we look at the system, the structure we have in the country, and then devolve it in a way that each state, whether you call them states, you call them zones or regions, you know, are able to tap their resources for the benefit of their people and the whole country. Unfortunately, many of these loans will not be retrieved from many of the states.
So what would be the implications of that? If, I mean, is it going to be back to square one if the loans are not paid back?
No, it will create a crisis. We will end up having to address the structure of the country. It is not the states not willing to pay.
It's not the state.
It's the ability to pay. The moment we have, let me give you a good example. They set a target of 20 billion for Apapa Port and Tinkan Island in 2014-15 financial year. I think Omogui was the DG, Federal Internal Revenue, or Karu Omogui at that time. Yes. They made the 20 billion. That was 480 billion a year. I think with the excess crude money shared and all that in 2015, Lagos only got 125 billion out of 480 from only one source. Don't forget the VAT is there, the airport is there, and all that. So when you ask yourself, the states are the one generating these resources to start with. We evacuate them to Abuja, then we ask the state to come hand in hand to get a fraction of it. Don't forget, each state government that is not collecting 13% oil subsidy is only getting 0.78%. Federal government is collecting 52.68%, of federal allocation. Each state is only getting 0.78% plus top-up of that 13%, which in some cases will take some states to 1 point something. That is the reality of the matter in the structure which we have created. So the states have done very well, with the meager resources which they have, to do what they have done so far. Many of the states, you can see what the states are doing with the lean financial resources. In many areas, you cannot see the presence of federal government, even with 52.68% of the allocation. So this is the reality. We need to come back and look at the structure that we have in the country that is creating problems for the state. It's suffocating those states. We need to look at that structure and then, devolve power in a way that the states will become viable entity while only paying nominal, taxes to federal government to run its own activities.
All right. Now, going forward, Nigerians are very concerned because when you talk about bailouts, when you talk about loans, when you talk about all of these things, sometimes Nigerians don't have a clear knowledge or understanding of how these monies are moved. Now, when it comes to transparency and accountability, what should be put in place now so that Nigerians can really understand? Because, for instance, in Lagos, there are so many people from Borno State who are in Lagos. They want to know what's going on in their state without necessarily going back to Borno State to know if they are getting bailout. I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. If they're getting a bailout, how will an indigene of Kano State or maybe a Bonny State, as the case may be in Lagos, get to know what is going on with the bailout funds in their own state?
Well, there are two ways of doing that. One is the states to be willing to provide information to the people, one of which is a requirement of the fiscal sustainability plan. That is, they must publish the budget and financial statements, of the state, audited financial statements of the state, year-on-year basis. That is one way. The other way is the press. The press can also help in providing information, to the people. Of course, that's where the Freedom of Information Act is there. But the other aspect of it is, in some cases, many of the states are resisting providing those information when the press actually press them, to obtain them. So these are some of the issues which we need to overcome.
Finally, we have to run. All revenue must go to the Federation account. This concept of Federation account, is it an anomaly in the first place?
Well, in the first place, you need to have a central pool where the money will go to, and then it's shared to the state. What we are doing currently,
even if we do eventually get restructuring?
Yes. Well, no, it won't. You won't have a federation account. You only have a federal government account when the country is restructured.
We'll have to leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Showme, of course, is a political analyst joining us this morning on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you. Let's take a breather and then we come back to dwell on our last topic of the day. Stay with us.